Okay. Today we are going into the second section of Kant. I feel like some of you read the third one. I don't know why, but it's the second one we're doing here. I just want to go over, let me mute, make sure everyone is muted. Make sure you guys are stay muted, right? During the, unless you want to obviously ask a question. Okay, so I just want to address a couple points that I saw in your readings. First of all, I want to ask Saint-Just, this Tuskegee experiment. Can you tell us a little bit about it? You mentioned it in your paper. I was intrigued.
It was an experiment done on a little Black community in the US where someone went in and they were trying to get the treatment for syphilis, and they infected like all of them with the syphilis infection because they were trying to come up with the vaccine to it, but they didn't let any of them know what they were inputting in them. They actually told them that it was something to help them stronger, get better, and so, and it was just really messed up.
So how do you connect it? So you use it to accuse Kant of something. So I'm curious, how do you connect Kant to that experiment?
Just with the doctor, or like for her reasoning, it was because, you know, she wanted to find the vaccine to syphilis. So her intrinsic reasoning was in her mind good, which, okay, understandable. You want to find a vaccine, but the consequences of her actions to infect an entire community of people in order to do so didn't work for me.
Good. So today you'll get clarification, because actually what the doctor was doing was thinking about the common happiness, not necessarily the common good, which is different. I mean, not even the common good. There's no common good. There's the good, right? So today you're going to find out that Kant actually would not have stood by that doctor, right? So we'll see that, because Kant is saying, the doctor is looking for a vaccine to make the well-being of people better, right? This is a happiness quest, right? But we'll see today that the good is something different. Are you following me so far, Saint-Just?
Yeah, I can kind of see. She probably was using a utilitarian perspective, like,
yes,
the more, and okay, I get that.
You'll see more even today. We'll get even clearer today. Allegra, do you want to add something to the discussion?
Oh yes, I was gonna add through that reasoning, that's what it's selfish, and the fact that I think Kant is in the second reading that people in itself have like absolute value, and they cannot be treated as ends. So using vaccines, trying to jack people with experimental vaccine, is using them as an end. In which case, that's a more. You can't use people as ends; they only have absolute value.
I'm correcting as a means. You got it, but you're using.
Yeah.
Am I using wrong terminology?
Yes, but you got the idea very well.
Oh, because before I read this, I had a different translation of the same thing. So with the use absolute value.
Using you're mixing the two up. It's you're using people as a means, not as.
Oh yeah, as a means. Oh, thank you.
Yes, very good observation. Saint-Just, do you follow what he said?
Yeah, because I remember that as well, because he would never support the doctor when she used all of those people as, yes, means to an end. Because
yes. Got it. Okay, excellent. Good. I'm glad we cleared that up. Okay, great. Okay, also I wanted to ask, there was a really interesting observation by Kant about animal rights, right? And I'm really tempted to make this one of your test questions, right? Are animals, right, rational beings? And therefore, do we have a moral duty towards them too? So thank you, Kang, for the idea. Now, she asks also, the way that Kant is talking about rational beings or men, right? She's wondering, well, me as a woman, do I fit in the category? Yes, Kant, you fit. Of course, Kant is not using inclusive language, but he means men to be all of humanity, right? So yes, all of us have reason. Now, he does say that certain people, like he mentioned, Kang, remind me, was it the Pacific Islanders? Kang, where are you?
Yeah, he just said this like really kind of offhand racist comment about the South Sea Islanders being like lazy and idle.
Yes, very good. So they can be lazy and idle, right? But they still have reason, right? It's different. The customs or the attitudes, right, will differ among people. And then you can say that maybe as in terms of mindset or customs, certain people are inferior to others, at least in his view, right? But when it comes to reason, we all have it the same, right? So in that sense, he's a progressive, right? When he says that we all share the same reason, the moral sense, right? An islander and somebody from Paris, right? If they see somebody dying unjustly, they will have the same moral reaction, right? But then it comes to different, today we'll talk about this, customs, habits, right, which vary, and which for Kant might be the reason, right, for the reason why some people lagging behind or some people can be deemed inferior, which obviously is typical of modern mindset, right? The West is superior. He's not leaving that behind. But the idea that we all share the same reason, that I think is progressive idea, and paved the way, by the way, for, of course, the emancipation of slavery, right? Since we are all, in a way, we share that attribute, right? Does that help a little bit, Kant? Redeem Kant a tiny bit, not too much, but a tiny bit?
Was he ever like explicitly against like colonialism and enslavement?
I have to look. I mean, it would be, I have to look at that. I'm not sure. Maybe I will give anyone extra credit if they find for me what was Kant's position on slavery and whether he wrote about it. Everybody heard me on that? This is a good opportunity for extra credit. Kant's position on slavery, whether he explicitly said something about that, to respond to Kant, right? I'm curious, because definitely his views were the views that were developed afterwards by the French Enlightenment philosophers to talk against slavery, right? We are all rational beings. We are all equal. We are all the same. Why are we enslaving each other, right? So Kant is in that line, but I wonder if he explicitly talked about it. Sosa, would you like to join the discussion?
Yes, I actually wanted to ask about the test. I just wanted to confirm, because I know it's due Saturday. You're just going to give us the questions, and then we just give you one-page answer, just like how it was before?
So I'll talk about the test in due time.
Okay, I just want to get prepared.
Thank you, Sosa. Actually, I'm going to shift things a bit around. I want you to actually have a group meeting before the test, just because I feel like the material is pretty hard, and I want you to have kind of, so you'll have a group meeting to prepare for the test, and then you'll have the test. So the test might be a little later, just to reassure you, Sosa. But we'll talk, I'll let you know on Wednesday. Okay, great. All right, let's get into the text. Otherwise, we'll never have time. Let's see. Oh, okay, thank you, Wai. She already answered the question. All right, thanks. Excellent. So he, will you find us the reference, Wai Shi? Find us the reference where Kant wrote about it. I would love to see that too. Okay, on with the text. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk about, number one, morality and prudence, the difference between the two. And number two, we'll get to the second categorical imperative, which is, in my view, makes more sense. This is where Kant is really, in my view, making a contribution, imperative. Okay. Oh, great! It's in our book, guys. So at one point, guys, you should stumble across this passage on slavery. It's in this book, Metaphysics of Morals. This is our book. Okay, thank you, Wai Shi. Good work. I'm putting a little plus sign next to your name to indicate your zeal, and to remember you when I do the final grade. Okay, so first of all, the first thing I want to talk about has to do with the distinction, which is very helpful in Kant, between morality and prudence, right? We have a huge debate nowadays in postmodernism, right? Of the fact that, well, since there are no more, right, everybody has a different perspective. We need to be respectful of each other's perspectives. And so in a way, there cannot be a universal good for everybody. This is really what they argue, right? And one of the leading thinkers of this trend is Caputo, John Caputo, right? Who in fact, so I'm writing his name if you guys want to read him. He's got great titles. He's a good writer, right? He has great titles, very attractive titles. You want to read him. But he argues something in many of his books, which is very problematic in my view, which is the fact that, we are now in a post-moral world, right? Post-ethical world. There are no more universal principles. we need to be respectful of everybody's perspective. And so we cannot prescribe to other people what they should do, and so forth and so forth, right? So this is a big problem, right? Because if there's no more moral foundation or universal morality, then you can murder someone and be like, well, in my culture, it's okay, right? In this neighborhood, it's okay. In this family, it's okay for me to beat my wife, right? In this culture, it's okay for me to kill my children, right? So this is a big problem. What he's trying to move towards is a very dangerous place, right? But you should look him up and check him out. So Kant, in a way, really helps this. He makes a really useful distinction between hypothetical imperative and categorical imperative. Let me write those down, right? Imperative versus categorical imperative, or what we could call morality or prudence, right? Or I'll start with prudence because that goes with hypothetical versus morality. So in essence, I'll just explain it, right? And then I'll give you a couple quotes. In essence, he says this, right? That there are two kinds of laws in the world, two kinds of principles. There's a moral law, which, by the way, is within us. Nobody's telling you what you should do. This is something very innate. This is something which has to do with, right? It's something that which is inside of you. And then you have the prescriptions of prudence, which would be like different customs, different traditions, different, right, cultural differences, right? And these, he says, what makes different cultures different is not a differing concept of what is right and wrong. It's a different concept on what is happiness and what isn't happiness. In other words, for him, custom, culture is really forged around what makes a society happy and prosper. And around this question of happiness, based on what makes us happy and prosperous, here are the rules. Right? And so because people have different views of what is happiness, they have different customs, right? In some cultures, happiness is telling half the population to shut up, right? In other cultures, happiness is everybody should talk, right? In some cultures, right, violence is seen as a legitimate form of communication. I'm laughing because I come from that kind of culture. From another culture, right, violence is not seen as a legitimate form of communication, right? It's not seen as making us happier, right? So differing concepts of happiness give rise to different rules and principles, traditions, and customs, right? But the differences are based not on a differing view of what is right or wrong. On this point, we all agree, according to Kant. They are based on a differing view on what makes us happy or not happy, a successful, vital as a community, or not vital, right? Kogan, you have a question. Go ahead. I see two questions, actually.
What about aspects of happiness that come from, what about aspects of culture, not happiness? What about aspects of culture that stem from religion?
There we'll all agree. You should find this principle everywhere. So yes, the fact that we have some elements in different cultures that overlap shows that there is, right, some moral. So yeah, you can say there are certain laws in culture which are moral, right? And that's what will unite the cultures, right? But when we differ, says Kant, it's not that we're differing morally, we are differing on our concept of happiness. Does that make sense, Kogan?
I mean, I suppose so. I mean, there are some people, right, who it's how do I explain this? Let's say in an ancient religion, there was this idea of sacrificing your children, which was the case in a lot of ancient religions. I mean, people would do that, and certainly to our minds, that would be immoral, sacrificing babies. But yeah, I don't know if those people were necessarily happy about having to do that. That could have just been something that they grew to live with because that was their religion, and they said, okay, like we're not happy about it, but we're going to do it anyway. You know, that's kind of like the thing that sort of you know, made some bells ring. You know, that some people do things in their religion not because they're happy about it, but because, you know, they have faith in religion and they want to do it anyway.
Think about it though, the reason why people sacrifice their children is to appease the gods, right? And if we appease the gods will make us prosperous. So there is kind of a happiness argument there. They're not doing it because it's right. They're doing it because they believe that to do so will bring them the God's favor and therefore happiness. Do you see what I'm saying?
So as a motive.
So yeah, they're motivated. Otherwise, why would you kill your child? Unless you have some motivation, right? And they do, at least, right, according to their scripture or whatever, they believe this will bring happiness to the community. One person dies, the whole community survives. Survival is a function of happiness, not of morality, right? King, add to the discussion. King.
I was going to ask, since we're kind of like operating in this binary between happiness and the absence of, or good and bad, morally immoral, would it be an oversimplification to equate happiness to good or morality, or should we not do that?
You can't, right? Sometimes they overlap, but happiness is about you. Happiness is always about the ego, right? Happiness is always something that comes back to you. The good brings you beyond yourself. It's something higher than you. Happiness has to do with the phenomenal realm, how I can be comfortable in the phenomenal realm. The good is a different kingdom, right? We'll talk about this different kingdom in the third section, right? It's another dimension. It's a higher dimension which draws you beyond the phenomenal realm. So yeah, sometimes they overlap by chance, but they're not at all belonging to the same kingdoms. Does that make sense, King, speaking of kingdom?
It makes sense. They're comparable, but they're not the same.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I like that. Okay, good. So let me give you a couple quotes, right? And by the way, this helps to, maybe have some relief, just to be an instigator, right? Some of us, right, who come from different traditions start to feel super guilty when we break the rules of that tradition. And Kant would say, well, that's okay. As long as you're not breaking a moral rule, right? You don't have to feel guilty. It's just you are entering a different vision of happiness, right? So if you choose to change the way you dress, or you change the way I eat, go into a religion, come out of a religion, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, right? It's wrong in terms that it's not wrong, but you are in a way choosing a different form of happiness. That's what Kant would say, right? To those who leave, right? Who leave behind their traditions or their customs for another worldview, right? He would say there's nothing inherently morally wrong about that, but you should know that you're leaving one concept of happiness for another concept of happiness, right? Don't expect once you've moved to the other dimension to get that happiness. It's different, right? Am I making sense? Okay, hopefully. Good. So here's a couple quotes to just cover this. I'm on page 20. So page 20. Let's see if you're all there. Page 20, you go to, oh my God. Oh yeah, okay, yes. You see the 408 in the margin right there. Who is there? Put your hand on the screen. Okay, so I'm gonna read like, where does this sentence end? The sentence that begins after the 408, after four long sentences. Consequently, reason. Are you there? Put your hand in the screen. Okay, so that's the quote for us right now. Consequently, reason unrelentingly commands actions of which the world has perhaps hitherto never provided an example, and whose feasibility might well be doubted by one who bases everything upon experience. This is such a profound quote, right? Because he's really distinguishing between these two dimensions here, right? The noumenal realm and the phenomenal realm will clash, right? And it will not seem feasible two things I'm getting from this passage, right? When you're dealing with phenomenal and noumenal, number one, he says it's not taken from the phenomenal realm, right? Phenomenal. I'll explain in a second. And number two, it doesn't seem feasible, right? So in other words, when you're doing something moral, right? When you're following your moral compass, meaning you are following the laws of the kingdom of the noumenal, right? When you're trying to do this within the phenomenal realm, it's going to look insane. People are going to tell you, how do you know? And this is not possible. This is not realistic, right? This is a sign. As soon as someone tells you it's not realistic to be this moral, you know you're in the right dimension. I mean, you know you're on the path of the noumenal, right? So for example, I'll give you an example. If someone tells you, you know, you can't succeed as a business if you don't learn to cheat the system a little bit, right? You're not going to succeed. You have to learn to cheat the system and a little bit, and also your customers. You have to learn to cheat your customers. Otherwise, you won't succeed. And you still say, nevertheless, I'm going to be moral. I'm not going to cheat the customers. I'm not going to cheat the system. You're going to look like a complete idiot, right? This is often what the moral path makes us look like. Why? Because it's a different kingdom, right? You are here, you have pledged allegiance to a different kingdom, and so you look like a fool in the phenomenal because you are living by a higher authority. Am I making sense a little bit? You put your hand in the screen if you see what I'm saying? Okay. All right. So that's that quote here. And then the other quote is on page 21. Yeah, you go from the top, you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Imitation has no place. Who is there? Put your hand in the screen. Okay. Imitation has no place at all in moral matters. In other words, you are never going to base your moral decision on observing how the world works. Why can't you do that? Why can't you base your moral decisions on what you observe and what you've experienced? Let me see if you follow. Let's see if any one of you, why is that not right? Yes, King, go ahead. King.
Is it because he says that morality has to be from a priori reasoning and cannot be from a posteriori reasoning?
Yes, right? And while we're at it, let's define those terms, right? A priori, this is pertaining to the noumenal. Before experience, that's what it means, right? Before experience. So this is the noumenal realm, right? That we talked about before, right, today. And a posteriori, this is based on experience, right? And this is, of course, the phenomenal. So because morality is not of this world, you can get almost the Christian overtones here of Kant, right? The influence, right? Morality is not of this world. It belongs to the noumenal, right? Therefore, you cannot base your moral decisions on anything that takes place in the phenomenal because it's a different dimension, right? That's the idea. Okay, now, let's get into the real difficult part, which is the second categorical imperative, because I only have now 25 minutes to go over that, and it's the best part. Okay, turn with me to page 35. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just summarize the argument, and then I'll give you the quotes. It'll be that way it'll be clearer and we'll go faster. Okay, so, all right. So up until now, we know there are two sides, instinct, reason. We know instinct is all about our happiness. We've already seen how often we think it's a reason choice, but it's actually still instinctual, right? So today we're going to find out, what does reason really sound like? What is reason really going to be revealing to us? What does reason tell us? What is the voice of reason sound like? Okay, so that's the goal for right now, right? For the next 25 minutes. So he goes and he talks about the difference. So let me again write in the chat this distinction between instinct, right, which is interested in happiness, which is in essence the good for me, right? Reason, however, is looking for morality, which is in fact the good in itself. Okay, so So now we need to take a step further than last time, right? Last time we talked about instinct equals happiness, reason equals morality. Today, we have to distinguish between the good for me and the good in itself, right? The good for me clearly is happiness. If this water is good for me, if this person is good for me, if studying this major is good for me, right? This is all things that pertain to my happiness. So choosing your major, choosing your spouse, you can't choose your children, sadly, right? Choosing your job, choosing what you're gonna eat, what you're gonna wear. This is all instinctual decisions, right? What is good for me, right? But Kant says there are moments in life when the question poses itself as to what is the good in itself. In other words, there are certain decisions which have nothing to do with our happiness. They have to do with the right thing to do. And the right thing to do is not interested in what's good for me. It's interested in the good. Okay, so the question is, what is the good? And how do I access it? How do I connect to it? How is it revealed to me, right? Now, listen carefully. We know about the good from which philosopher? Who started this idea that there's the good? Remind me, in Western philosophy. Plato, very good. Plato is really the one, right? The good, right? So now for Plato, of course, the good is an abstract entity. It's a form that we connect to intellectually by leaving behind experience. We rise above experience and we connect to the perfect form of the good, right? Now here's something that Kant is going to do, which in my view is extraordinary. It blew my mind when I first read it. I read it, but when I understood it, right? Blew my mind because Kant is doing something so powerful and so unlike the Kant that I imagined him to be, that I was really blown away. And he sets the tone for everybody that follows. Buber, Levinas, all these guys are now going to surf on that wave. Okay, so listen very carefully. Everybody listening, let me see. Are your hands in the screen? Are you listening? Okay. For Kant, this good, which Plato situates somewhere in the celestial, right, the heavens, right? This good is going to be found here and now. Within the phenomenal realm is where you encounter the good. It's not some form floating around in a separate realm. It's encountered here and now. Okay, so now you're wondering, okay, where is it? I don't see it. What does it mean, right? So let me define what Kant means by the good, and then you will immediately know where to identify it, right? What is the good? Let me write it in the chat, right? The good is whatever, of course, transcends us, right? We have no power over, we cannot understand, grasp, manipulate, right? It's above us. Okay, that's the good. Something beyond us that it's not for us. It shines by itself, right? It's not something that we can control, manipulate. It's another dimension, right? Remember, the good is another dimension. It's in the noumenal, right? Okay. Now, knowing this, that the good is something we cannot manipulate, control, use for our own good, right? Can you tell me where we can find the good, according to Kant, in the world? Who is the bearer of this good, or what is the bearer of this good? King, go ahead.
It would be us. It would be in the noumenal realm, which exists within our ability to reason.
Very good, right? According to Kant, this noumenal good, right, is found within every human being. We all have something in us that cannot be used, manipulated, and controlled. And that, for Kant, is the good shining from within us. Okay, let me say that again. I'll write it down. We all have within us, right, a dimension that cannot be controlled, mastered, I can't write, manipulated, right? This is, according to Kant, the noumenal in us. I want to capitalize this. Okay, in us, right? And this is the good in itself, right? In other words, we are all carrying within ourselves the noumenal. Yes, we're phenomenal. Yes, part of us can be seen and controlled and manipulated and tortured and abused and, and used, right? Certainly. But within each one of us, there is this sacred dimension that you cannot touch. No matter how much abuse you have received, or even if you have undergone torture, or how many people used you, there's still something that they did not touch. That thing is the noumenal within us. It's the good in itself. It's this good which can never be good for something. It's this inner light, right? Which no one can ever use to their own benefit, right? So, Salvatore, the good is in the noumenal and the noumenal is within us. Aha, that's where Kant becomes very interesting, right? Unlike Plato, who separates the two, right? Kant is saying, no, the noumenal is found within each human being, right? And it is this noumenal field or dimension which reason sees with complete clarity and knows that it must protect. That's in essence the visual representation of Kant's philosophy. I've drawn you a cartoon, right? In other words, your reason is always going to, like a little radar, right? Toot, 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 right? Is going to always react when it sees the noumenal, right? Toot, 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 right? When it sees a human being, toot, 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 right? It notices, it senses, it captures the noumenal there, and therefore you are told by your reason, step back. You cannot touch this. You cannot control this. You cannot manipulate this. You need to take a step back. Yes, you can control the lipstick or the book or the bottle. There, your reason is just silent, right? Snooze. But as soon as a human being comes in its field, right, of vision, right, it awakens, and you know right there is something good, which is good in itself, which I cannot make into something good for me. Does that make sense? And that's what your reason is always going to message you or alert you to. Be careful. Here, human being, carrying the noumenal, therefore thou shalt not use or control or manipulate this good, which necessarily, because it's a noumenal dimension, escapes your grasp. Okay, am I clear? I need to make sure you guys got this. Who got this? Okay, who didn't get this? Who needs me to clarify? You all got this? Ah, Delmas, ask your question, Delmas, go ahead.
The I think the illustration that you're giving about the radar is it that the good is in us and reason is what's guiding the radar in order to help us determine what we can and cannot use?
Almost. So you have reason in you. That's the radar, okay?
Oh, okay.
As you're walking through the world, okay, let me make you muted. Guys, please keep yourselves muted. Thank you. Okay. You're walking through the world with your radar. You see a book, snooze. You see a lipstick, snooze. You see a bottle, nothing happens. You see a human being, and you know, your action in the world is always to take and use, right? This is how we naturally function. This is instinct, right? Take and use for my own happiness. This is instinct. This is us freely wandering through the world with instinct, right? Now, all of a sudden you come to a human being and your instinct wants to use that person in all kinds of ways, right? You want to use them for their car. You want to use them for their body. You want to use them for their money. You want to use them for their status, right? Or just for company, right? So now you want to use, and all of a sudden something in you feels bad about it. Doot, 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 doot. That's your reason. Why? Because your reason is perceiving always the noumenal. Where's the noumenal? Here, within each one of us. So the reason is telling you, you feel bad about using that person. That's your reason telling you, here lies the noumenal. Here lies the good, which is not for you. Here lies the good in itself. You cannot touch, manipulate. You need to respect the sacred dimension of the noumenal that inhabits that human being. Am I clearer now, Delmas? Where are you?
Yes. Yes.
Good. Other questions? Any other questions? Let me see. Some hands were raised. So Kim, and then Allegre, and then Robayo.
So I do kind of understand, the innate good in people, but what would Kant say about people like, let's say, Hitler or Jeffrey Dahmer, or people that have these like antisocial tendencies?
So glad you asked. Everyone, says Kant, right, has the noumenal within them in as much as they're a human being because they have reason. That's the noumenal, right? So even if you're not a good person, you still are a bearer of the noumenal, right? So even someone like Hitler, right, you have to, like Kant says later in the text, respect that human dimension within that monster, right? Even though they're a monster, they've turned into a monster, they still carry rationality, albeit very small, right? But they still carry within them the noumenal, the good in itself. So yes, to have the good of it, the noumenal within you, doesn't mean necessarily you're going to be a good person. It just means you are worthy of respect as a human being. Does that make sense, Kim?
It does. Thank you.
Great. Who is the next in line? Allegre.
Yes. So the numeral is like something that cannot be like corrupted per se. We cannot like touch it. It's, although it's abstract, we all take from it. So what I will, because I'm looking at this from like a religious like lens, because when he was religious, so I might clarify, or he might say like this might be akin to like heaven or per se, because it's incorruptible. So saying like all the good is up there, and like while all the, if he believes in hell or not, like our like desires, what we want to gratify ourselves is in hell, and this is why we abstain from like greed, or like we also have purity. So you can see some like religious tendency in his making of this, which I found interesting.
I thought you were going to mention this because it's even closer. The concept of the image of God, right? That's what he's talking about. That's what he's talking about. We all have the image of God, i.e. the noumenal, i.e. the good in itself, right? Which is this incorruptible part of us, right? So no matter what we do, we're still human beings. We're still worthy of respect, right? So yeah, that would be closer to what you're talking about. Let's see, Pario, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. You had said that for Kant, the good is found in the phenomenal and in the here and now, right? So it is found in the phenomenal realm through the noumenal in us?
It's found in us who are phenomenal beings.
Right, but it's the noumenal in us that then is in turn phenomenal, yeah?
We are phenomenal beings, right? You see me, you touch me, but within me, there is something more. There is the noumenal. So that's how I'm saying the noumenal is found in the phenomenal. It's found in us who are phenomenal beings, right? Does that make sense? Okay, great. Good questions, guys. Kang, go ahead.
How is that different from Plato? Because I thought Plato was saying that there exists this higher plane of forms, but that people still partake in those forms, and that we recognize the form by seeing like the imperfect version of it.
Yes, excellent. It's a little different because for Plato, you have to rise above, at least from my reading, right? There are many different readings of Plato, but my reading, for example, of the Symposium, right? Where you have to start with a beautiful person, but eventually you have to rise to beauty itself, right? There is this movement. Yes, the form is initially encountered in the phenomenal, but it seems to me that in Plato, eventually you have to really look at the form itself and make abstraction of the phenomenal, of the person, right? Whereas for Kant, you are directly connecting to the person and you never leave the person. You have to protect the person to protect the noumenal in them. Do you see a little bit the difference?
Yeah, so I guess for Plato, like our bodily selves would be a limitation, whereas for Kant, it's actually necessary.
Yeah, you protect the body of the person because they're carrying this precious treasure, right? Whereas for Plato, you have to eventually rise above the beautiful person and look at beauty itself. So the beautiful person is kind of discarded in the passage, like they're the stepping stone.
Right.
And for Kant, that's using using that person to get to the good. Kant is like horrified, right? Would be horrified with using someone as a stepping stone, because for Kant, the noumenal stays there. That's the only place you can see it. This is so good because this is exactly what we'll see with Buber and Levinas, right? So it's a great entry into that. Okay, Robayo, go ahead.
So, what about when it comes to animals? Because there's some sort of like morality where Kant talks about animals, but they're not humans, so they don't have maybe the full extent of the nominal. I don't know.
I'm going to use that as a test question so you guys can think about it. That's going to be one of your test questions that you have to think about. I want you to think about animals, whether they count as rational beings, and how can you make an argument for that, right? So yes, we'll come back to that issue, definitely. Okay, now let's go into the text and look at the quotes, okay? So you can put everything together. I gave you the story, the cartoon. Now I give you the actual words. So go to page 35. You go to the second paragraph. In the middle, on the left, you have capital H, hence. Who is there? Middle of the second paragraph, on the left, capital H, hence. Okay. Hence, there arises a distinction between subjective ends which rest on incentives and objective ends which depend on motives valid for every rational being. Okay, so in other words, again, the distinction, instinct, reason. Instinct goes with subjective ends, meaning you're looking for incentives, what is good for you. That's an incentive. You're looking for what is good for you, okay? Reason is looking at objective ends, which depends on motives valid for every rational being. In other words, reason is attuning itself not for what's good for you, but is attuning itself to the good in itself in every rational being. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Or put your hand on the screen if you're seeing what I'm seeing. Your instinct is looking at, let me put it in the chat. Instinct looks at subjective ends. In other words, what's good for you. That's subjective ends, or incentives, right? Reason looks at objective ends. Looks at the good in itself, which lies in every rational being, okay? Good. Continuing now, what is a rational being, right? Why is it the good in itself? Go to the last paragraph. Now I say that man, who is there? Last paragraph, okay. Now I say that man, and in general, every rational being, so this includes women and the islanders, to respond to Kant, exists as an end in himself and not merely as a means to be arbitrarily used by this or that will. In other words, a human being, yes, there is part of them you can use and manipulate to your own benefit, but there's also part of them which you cannot, which remains distinct from your own happiness, which is a sacred dimension, the noumenal dimension. That's what Kant is saying, right? A man exists as an end, meaning they're good in themselves and not just good for you, a means. Okay, let me write down these two. When he says ends, he means that person is good in themselves, not good for you, right? They have intrinsic value, beauty, light, whatever, goodness. means good for you. It's what is good or useful for you. Right? I hope everyone's following. I feel like I'm getting lost in words. Okay, so in other words, what he's saying is a human being is both, it has a dimension which you cannot use, which you shouldn't use, which is sacred, which is the noumenal, which is the good in itself, right? And that's why you can't just use a human being like I'm using the book, because there is that dimension, that sacred line or boundary, which reason is alerting me to and saying, don't touch, right? Can't touch this, for those of you who know the beginnings of hip hop. Okay, now, continuing. Yes, I'm just continuing where I was. He must in all his, hold on. No. Let me turn the page. Turn the page, go to top of 36. On the other hand, are you there? Put your hand in the screen. Okay. On the other hand, rational beings are called persons, right? We carry the noumenal and that makes us persons, right? Not just objects. Inasmuch as their nature already marks them as ends in themselves, meaning they're good in themselves, they're not good just for me, i.e. something which is not to be used merely as a means, and hence, this is important, underline this, there is imposed thereby a limit on all arbitrary use of such beings, which are thus objects of respect. In other words, the human being that appears in front of me, that I want to use and control and manipulate, there's that dimension which stops me, which reason is attuning itself to. It's telling me, whoa, step back, right? And so therefore what is happening is a limit is placed on my instinct and on my quest for happiness. Every human being is going to arise as placing a limit on my happiness. In other words, I want to do all these things with that person, but because they are more than just an object, and my reason is they're containing the noumenal, they can't just be used as an object, right? And so there's a limit. What my reason is alerting me to is step back. Don't use, don't abuse, don't manipulate, don't possess, right? Take off your shoes, to use biblical language, right? You're standing on holy ground. Don't do it, right? And at that moment, I realized that what I wanted to get, the happiness I wanted to achieve through that person, is thwarted, right? That's what he's saying here, right? There is a limit, right? My happiness, in other words, let me write this down because this is well put, right? My happiness stops where the dignity of a human being begins. My happiness stops where the dignity of another being begins, right? In other words, for the sake of their dignity, of their personhood, of the sacred dimension they carry, I stop myself from controlling them, using them, abusing them. And at that moment, I am protecting, revealing the realm of the good within the phenomenal. Okay, I have a couple questions. Kant, Tessier-Miller, and Saint-Just, in that order. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I just forgot to put my hand down.
Okay, Tessier-Miller.
So this is only in play when you identify the other as a rational being, right?
When you reason. Right? And by the way, I sometimes wonder, because when I'm looking at, to go back to animals, right? When I'm looking at the cruelty against animals, I feel uneasy. Why? Why? I don't feel uneasy when, you know, I'm killing, like, you know, well, depends on the animal. But right, if I'm breaking the bottle, I'm not going to feel uneasy like I do when I feel the suffering of some animals. Is this my reason telling me there's sacred ground there? That, who knows, right? Is that where you're going, Tessier-Miller? I don't know. I went there myself. Tessier-Miller.
No. No, this is what I wrote in my response, is when we identify others as rational beings, and that, you know, in this day and age, is when we don't identify someone as rational, we look as them as less of a person. You know, I gave an example as if someone was to contemplate suicide or go through the process of suicide. I had a discussion with someone stating that in the act or during the action of suicide, that person becomes, irrational. And in my perspective, I thought that even in the action till the end, that they were rational, because they thought of the process and they identified of life and the ending of death. So my question is, when we identify other people or tend to use them, is when we don't see them as rational beings.
The last part of your sentence was correct. The first part, be careful, because rational doesn't have to do with calculations, right? Or that person can't reason. It's not the ability to reason, right? Rational is simply the noumenal. It's understanding. That's the ability to reason. Do you remember the distinction between, were you there when I made the distinction in the, did you listen to the intro lecture at Tessier-Miller where I made the distinction between understanding and reason? Do you remember?
Yes, but I think this is where I always get confused of when, at what point of
reason,
that.
Reason is just sensing the noumenal. I would explain it like that. Reason is just a radar for the noumenal, for something sacred, right? Something I cannot touch or use. That's reason, right? And when I'm touching and using it, I feel bad. That's reason. That's it. I would see that reason as a sense of the sacred. Everything else the reasoning, rationality, all this stuff, right? This is understanding for Kant. Does that help a little bit, Tessia Miller?
Then that gets a little tricky when we're talking about animals, because my don't touch, like if I see roadkill, it hurts my heart. It really does. But like if I'm having, fish and I have to chop it up, cut off his head, is what I'm eating, so it's different with animals.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we'll have to think about that, right? Are animals also containing the noumenal? Are they also rational beings in the Kantian sense, right? They don't have reasoning like us, but rational, remember, doesn't mean reasoning, doesn't mean the ability to reason. It means the ability to sense the noumenal, the ability to hold back in order to not abuse or use someone, right? So it's a little different. We'll see what you guys do with that. Saint-Just and then King.
I was just gonna say that, like, I definitely, like, on a positive note, Kant is very, very good at, in terms of like trying to help us, distinctualize stuff. But I feel like he still can cause a very slippery slope for someone like a Hitler or like the doctor I was referring to earlier in my writing, because it's like, if they can argue that in the time that that those trials were being done in 1932, was able to argue that the people she was using as means to an end weren't necessarily people in that sense, then she can still argue with. Were you able to hear any of this?
I heard some of it. So I see what if we can argue that someone is not a real person, we can do whatever we want with them, right? But for Kant, anybody who has like, wow, yeah, I see what you're saying. Because of course you can argue and make any type of argument. And because reason is not an argument, it's a sense. And if you don't have that sense, then it's like hopeless, right? So that's an interesting question, right? What if some people, I have to think about that. That could be a nice test question too. Let me make a note for myself. In other words, which is, by the way, what propaganda does. It dehumanizes, right? If you see like the Nazi strategy and the Rwandese strategy was first to dehumanize, and then you don't have any qualms, right? It, in a way, your reason is not able to detect anymore humanity there, right? And so then you're able to kill. So I'm putting a note to self. I'm gonna think about what you said, right? The role of propaganda and how it can, in a way, interfere with reason, and therefore what do we do then? How can we prevent that? So I thank you. I have to think about it, Saint-Just. Let's see. King, you can help.
Yes, I was going to raise a similar point that I think it's fascinating that we would that we view the sanctity of the noumenal realm, because I think it's something that we share amongst each other. So for one to violate the noumenal realm would be to violate oneself, which goes against self-preservation. I don't know. Maybe animals have that as well in their ability to identify each other. Like when a dog sees another dog and say, "Oh, he's cool. I could, greet him in this way." Or maybe it may be a type of dog that doesn't like other dogs and say, "Well, it's not a human, so therefore I'm gonna bark at this other dog." So maybe they have that ability to identify noumenal realms as well. But you could jump over all that and said, well, this person isn't a person, so we don't have to, value their life at all, which is where we get into the dark stuff. But my argument is that Kant isn't responsible for somebody making that claim, because their claim just isn't, it shouldn't be legitimized, because they clearly have ulterior motives in making that claim. And throughout history, their reasonings really isn't up to par, and can be backed through, you know, legitimate means. It's been done with the Nazis calling Jews roaches and rats. In slavery, comparing African Americans to monkeys. The English did it with the Irish, calling them barbarians and savages. It's clearly a trend throughout history. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say. I'm just ranting from this point on.
I think you guys are starting. I'm going to definitely, this is going to be one of the things I want you to think about. I'm going to formulate a question based on this discussion once I have a clearer mind. And so thank you, Saint-Just, and thank you, King. We're going to think about it further. Now we need to conclude, but I think there's one more question. No, there isn't. Yes. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so yeah, let me briefly conclude and then we can go. So definitely, right, I hope you're seeing more now what reason is detecting, right? Reason is interested in the sanctity of the human being and the dignity of the human being. And whenever that is jeopardized, that's when reason steps in and says, back off. That's in essence the role of reason, right? Let me say it again. Reason is this kind of watchdog, right, of human dignity. It's pointing to us the difference between human beings and the rest of the objects of the world. Reason is what alerts us that here there is something you cannot touch, use, or manipulate. And when you start to do so, you hear it, you feel it, right? That's reason, the watchdog of human dignity, the watchdog of human sanctity. Now, of course, the question is, well, when does this watchdog, how is it that sometimes this watchdog doesn't work, as is the case of, you know, slavery, Nazism, and so forth. So we'll talk about that, and at least I'll formulate a question, okay? But you're seeing how this is so interesting in Kant. I just want to point two progressive moments in what he just said. Number one, he situates the noumenal in the phenomenal, and this is almost an existentialist move, right? This is something that existentialism will do with Marcel, Heidegger, Kierkegaard, bring the noumenal into the phenomenal. So Kant is it's making an existentialist move. And the second thing, of course, is this notion that the voice of reason is really relational. It's about how to relate to a human being, right? It's not rational, it's relational, right? So it's that part in us which is, in a way, capable to relate to a human being as a human being, right? That's, and I'm just paving the way for Levinas and Buber and so forth. Okay, good. All right, let's stop there. Actually, we could, I don't know. No, we shouldn't. We don't have any more time, but I'll let you think about now what would be the answer. Well, let's do it really quick. Okay, I'm putting you on gallery view. Remember the question I asked you about the person, their father died and they have to cheat off of you, or they're going to lose all their scholarship and everything? What would Kant say you have to do? Who thinks that Kant would say they shouldn't cheat on you, no matter what? Okay. Okay, great. Who thinks that Kant would say it's okay to let them cheat on you? Okay, great. You guys got it, right? Because for Kant, it's not about the happiness of others. It's about the dignity of others. Make sure you see the difference, right? You're not there to make people happy, nor are you there to make yourself happy. It's not about making either yourself or someone else happy. It's about protecting the dignity in you and the dignity in them. You don't use them and you don't let yourself be used, right? So it's not about being sacrificial and making someone happy to the detriment of your dignity, right? So make sure you write this down, right? Reason is not about the happiness of others. We know it's not about our own happiness, but likewise, it's not about the happiness of others. It's about preserving the dignity of the others, but also preserving my own dignity. I have a moral duty also to protect my dignity, to not let myself be used, right? Just like I have a moral duty to protect the dignity of others. Okay, we can close on that. I'll tell you more about, most likely the exam will not be this weekend, so I'll tell you more about it next time. All right, let's call it a day. I'm gonna stop the recording.